Hello everyone who is watching this video. Today, let's come together to follow the story about the life of Hoai Ca. A new morning begins gently and peacefully at the small home of Hoai Ca and Hùng. As the early sunlight softly filters through the trees in front of the yard, the whole space seems to brighten with the familiar freshness of the countryside. Hoai Ca sends everyone her warm wishes for a peaceful, joyful, and fulfilling new day. For her, mornings that begin in such a simple setting always bring an indescribable warmth, like a gentle reminder that sometimes life only needs these small, ordinary moments to feel complete. The atmosphere of the early days of the new year still lingers everywhere. In the small garden behind the house, the green vegetable beds are still covered with the light dew of the morning. A gentle breeze passes through, causing the leaves to sway softly and creating a scene that is both quiet and peaceful. Everything seems to move more slowly compared to the hurried rhythm of life in the city. Here in the countryside, each day carries its own simple beauty that helps people feel calmer and lighter inside. That morning was a weekend morning. As usual, Hoai Ca woke up early to go out to the garden and harvest the fresh vegetables she had been taking care of over the past several days. That familiar work had become part of her daily routine. The green rows of vegetables were carefully cut and tied neatly into bundles, ready to be taken to the market for sale. For Hoai Ca, taking care of the garden with her own hands and bringing its harvest to the market was not just work, it was also a simple joy in life. While Hoai Ca was busy working in the garden, in front of the small house, an elderly woman had quietly arrived and was standing by the gate. She had come looking for Hùng, but at that moment there was no one inside the house. The area in front of the gate remained as quiet as usual. The narrow road that passed by the house only occasionally had someone walking along it. Otherwise, there was only the soft sound of the wind and the birds singing in the trees. The elderly woman looked around for a moment before slowly sitting down on the small stone bench placed in front of the gate. Her movements were slow, and her hair had turned almost completely gray with age. Even so, her eyes still showed patience as she waited. From time to time, she lifted her head to look down the road, as if hoping to see a familiar figure appear at the end of the path. Time passed little by little. The morning sunlight gradually rose higher, and the air became warmer. Yet the elderly woman remained there, patiently waiting without showing any sign of hurry. Sometimes she glanced toward the yard in front of the house, and sometimes she looked toward the small road again, hoping that Hùng would soon return. Finally, after quite a long time, Hùng came back from work. After a busy day at the office, as he approached the gate, he suddenly noticed the elderly woman sitting there waiting. Realizing that someone had come looking for him, Hùng quickly walked over. He politely greeted her with a respectful nod and asked kindly how she was doing. Not wanting her to continue waiting outside the gate, Hùng opened the door and invited her into the house. He quickly poured her a glass of water and asked a few questions about her health and how the new year had been so far. The small house soon felt warmer as the two of them began to talk. After exchanging a few polite questions about health and the beginning of the year, the elderly woman slowly began to explain the reason she had come to see him. Her voice lowered slightly, and the worry on her weathered face became clear. She told Hùng that she was currently living with her grandson. The boy's parents had to work far away, so they had entrusted the child to her care. Since he was very young, the boy had lived with her, and the two of them had relied on each other in their small home. Because he attended a boarding school, he stayed at school during the weekdays and only returned home on weekends to be with his grandmother. Those weekends were the moments she always looked forward to the most. They were the times when the small house was filled with voices and laughter, with the presence of the grandson she loved dearly. But recently, things had begun to change, and that change made her increasingly worried. According to her, The boy had started behaving differently lately. Without the close guidance of his parents, he had gradually been influenced by some of the friends around him. Instead of focusing on his studies like before, he had become more interested in playing and often neglected his schoolwork. On the weekends when he returned home, he rarely talked with her anymore. Sometimes he would just quickly leave the house to meet his friends. As his grandmother, she had tried many times to gently advise him. She wanted him to understand that studying was very important for his future. But each time she spoke to him, he either stayed silent or seemed not to care very much. Her words no longer seemed to affect him the way they once did. Now that she was older and her health was no longer as strong as before, she felt increasingly helpless in the face of her grandson's changes. She loved him deeply and worried about his future, but she did not know how to help him understand what was right. Each time she watched him leave the house to go out and play, her heart grew heavier with concern. After many nights of thinking about it, she finally decided to come and ask Hùng for help. In her mind, Hùng was someone who worked in the police force, someone responsible and respected by many people in the community. She believed that if Hùng could meet and talk with her grandson, the boy might listen and reconsider his behavior. That was why she had come to his house early that morning to find him. In her heart, she only hoped that with advice from someone her grandson might respect and listen to, the boy would gradually change and return to the right path in life. After listening to the elderly woman's story, Hùng remained silent for a few seconds. His eyes lowered slightly as he thought about everything she had just shared. The simple story she told was not unfamiliar to him. In both his work and everyday life, Hùng had encountered many situations like this before. In rural areas like theirs, many families had no choice but to let parents leave for the city to work, hoping to earn enough to provide a better life and education for their children. Yet when the adults were away for too long, the children often grew up under the care of their grandparents, people who were already aging and no longer had the strength to closely guide every step of their lives. Hùng understood this reality very clearly. He knew that most parents never truly wanted to be separated from their children. But because of the struggle to make a living, they had to make that difficult choice. They sacrificed time with their children in exchange for a more stable future for the family. However, that distance sometimes created large gaps in a child's upbringing. Without the regular attention and guidance of their parents, many children could easily be influenced by the people around them, especially friends of the same age. If the environment was positive, they might grow up well. But without proper guidance at the right time, even a few bad habits could slowly change them in ways that adults might not notice until it was too late. Looking at the worried expression on the elderly woman's face, Hùng could clearly feel the concern of a grandmother for her grandson. Even though she was old and her health was no longer strong, she still paid close attention to every small change in her grandson's behavior. That was why, when she noticed him beginning to fall into unhealthy habits, she felt so deeply uneasy. After thinking for a moment, Hùng finally spoke in a calm and gentle voice, as if trying to reassure her. He told her that she did not need to worry too much. Sometimes the changes children go through at that age are just temporary phases. What matters most is that someone takes the time to talk with the boy and help him understand what is right and wrong. Hùng promised that he would arrange some time during the weekend to visit her home and meet the boy. He wanted to speak with him directly, to understand what he was thinking and what might be causing the changes in his behavior. Hearing Hung's words, the elderly woman's face seemed to relax a little. Since the moment she had stepped into the house, worry had been clearly visible in her eyes. But after hearing that Hùng was willing to help, she felt much more relieved. At least now she knew she would not have to carry this worry alone anymore. Just then, the sound of familiar footsteps echoed from outside the yard. Hoai Ca had just returned from the garden behind the house after finishing her morning harvest. In her hands, she still carried the basket filled with freshly cut green vegetables. When she saw that there was a guest inside the house, Hoai Ca quickly stepped in, greeted the elderly woman politely, and smiled warmly. After placing the basket of vegetables on the table, Hoai Ca sat down beside them and listened as Hùng explained the situation. As she listened to each part of the story, she gradually understood why the elderly woman had come so early in the morning. When she heard about how the boy had begun to change and neglect his studies, Hoai Ca could not help but feel thoughtful. She understood that at that age, many children could easily be influenced by the people around them if there was no guidance at the right time. Sometimes just a few sincere words of advice or an honest conversation could help them reconsider their actions. Hoai Ca gently expressed that she would also be willing to help if needed. In her view, everyone in life goes through moments when they need the care and understanding of others. Sometimes a few encouraging words or a sincere conversation can help a young person realize the right path to follow. The conversation inside the small house continued in a very simple and sincere atmosphere. There were no grand speeches or complicated discussions, just honest sharing among people who were all hoping for something better in the future of a young boy. After talking for a while longer, the elderly woman finally stood up to leave. Perhaps because she had finally expressed the worries that had been weighing on her heart, her face now looked lighter than when she had first arrived. Hùng quickly stood up and walked her out to the gate. He even offered to accompany her home and take the opportunity to meet her grandson sooner. However, the elderly woman gently explained that the boy would not be coming home that week. According to her, he had said he needed to stay at school for extra classes and would return later than usual. Hearing this, Hùng nodded in understanding. He told her that it was fine and that he would simply wait until the following weekend. When the boy returned home, he would come by to speak with him then. The elderly woman thanked him repeatedly because for her, just having someone willing to help was already something very meaningful. After seeing her off at the gate, Hùng stood quietly watching as she slowly walked along the narrow road in front of the house. Beside him, Hoai Ca also stood silently, watching her leave. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, but both were lost in their own thoughts. They understood that every family has its own story and its own difficulties. Life is often far more complicated than it appears on the surface. There are silent worries that only the people experiencing them can truly understand. Yet Hùng and Hoai Ca also believed that sometimes a timely act of care, an honest conversation, or sincere advice could gradually help things improve. And it is often through those simple acts of kindness that many stories in life begin to change for the better. That afternoon, when the sunlight began to soften after a long day, Hoai Ca returned to the garden behind the house to finish the work she had not yet completed. After harvesting vegetables in the morning and taking them to the market to sell, there were still many small tasks waiting for her in the garden. For Hoai Ca, the garden was not simply a place to grow plants, it was a place deeply connected to her life and the hopes she carried for the future. On that familiar piece of land, every row of vegetables and every small tree was carefully tended by her each day. That day, Hoai Ca brought out several young papaya seedlings she had just bought from a nursery nearby. The papaya plants were still small, their slender trunks delicate, but their leaves were already bright and healthy. She gently dug small holes in the soil, placed each seedling into the ground, and carefully covered the roots with earth. Every movement Hoai Ca made was thoughtful and careful. She pressed the soil gently around the base of each plant, and then watered them lightly so the roots could settle quickly. In her heart, she quietly hoped that a few months from now these papaya trees would grow strong, and someday the small garden would be filled with sweet golden papayas. For Hoai Ca, every plant in the garden felt like a small hope planted into the earth. Even though it required patience and daily care, and sometimes a long wait, seeing the plants grow and eventually bear fruit made every effort worthwhile. While Hoai Ca was focused on her work, Hùng returned home along the small road in front of the house after finishing his day at work. As he stepped into the yard, he looked out toward the familiar garden and saw Hoai Ca standing beside the newly planted papaya trees. The sight made him smile quietly. Hùng walked closer and bent down to look at the small papaya plants that had just been placed into the soil. Their fresh green leaves gently swayed in the soft evening breeze. He nodded with satisfaction before asking Hoai Ca about the new seedlings. Hoai Ca brushed the soil lightly from her hands and happily explained that she had just bought them from a nearby nursery. She wanted to plant a few more fruit trees so that one day the garden would grow richer and more diverse. If everything went well, in just a few seasons this place might become a small garden full of sweet fruit. The two of them stood together in the garden, working and talking at the same time. Their conversation turned to ideas about expanding the garden, planting new trees, improving the older plots of soil, and gradually developing the land into a small farm in the future. Their life did not include luxury or extravagance, but it was filled with peace and hope. Each small plan they discussed made both of them feel excited. They were not grand dreams, but simple plans meant to help their lives grow steadier and more meaningful. While they were still talking, Hùng suddenly paused for a moment. He looked at Hoai Ca and smiled as if he had something special to share. After a few seconds of silence, he told her that he had some good news. Hoai Ca looked at him curiously. Seeing her expression, Hùng reached into his pocket and pulled out a carefully folded sheet of paper. It was an official document from his workplace. When he unfolded it, he handed it to Hoai Ca. On the paper was the official decision from his superiors approving his transfer to work in his hometown. According to the decision, starting next month he would no longer have to travel far for work. His new position would be arranged locally, close to where he was living. That meant Hùng could finally stay near his family, near Hoai Ca, and build their life together right there in their hometown. After reading the document, Hoai Ca stood still for several seconds. A wave of emotion rose inside her that was difficult to describe. All the hope she had quietly held for so long had finally become reality. Before this, whenever Hùng had to work far away, the two of them could only see each other at certain times. Even though they always tried their best to arrange moments together, the distance created by work often made them feel that they were missing many ordinary moments of life. Now, knowing that Hùng would be transferred back to work in their hometown, Hoai Ca could not hide her emotion. A smile appeared on her face, but her eyes were slightly moist with joy. From now on, they would have more time to care for the garden together, to work side by side, and to build a stable life in this place. To celebrate the good news, Hùng decided to prepare a small dinner. On the way home, he had stopped by the market to buy some fresh beef. He told Hoai Ca that tonight he would cook grilled beef so they could celebrate together. While Hùng began preparing dinner in the kitchen, Hoai Ca returned to the garden to finish a few remaining tasks. She cut some fresh greens to feed the rabbits. The small rabbits quickly gathered around when they saw her bringing out the food. After that, Hoai Ca took the opportunity to tidy up several old vegetable beds in the garden. The plants that had already been harvested were cleared away to prepare the soil for a new planting season in the coming summer. The garden gradually became more organized, ready for new crops. Time passed quickly, and the sun slowly sank behind the distant trees. The sunset cast a golden glow over the small garden, making the scene feel peaceful and warm. In that quiet space, Hùng and Hoai Ca prepared their simple dinner together. The smell of grilled beef filled the air, blending with the scent of soil and fresh vegetables from the garden. There was no big celebration and nothing particularly extravagant. It was simply two people preparing a modest meal together after a day of work, yet it carried a warmth that felt deeply comforting. For them, life did not need grand things to be meaningful. All it required was a peaceful home, someone beside you to share each moment of the day, and hopes for a good future. And through those simple moments, Hùng and Hoài Ca both believed that the road ahead would become brighter. Their peaceful days in the small garden would continue to grow little by little, just like the young plants slowly taking root and rising from the familiar soil of their homeland.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay mình tiếp tục đưa đến video về câu chuyện của Hoài Ca và Hùng như mọi người cũng thấy là bây giờ mình đang làm video. Giờ thì mình đang đặt cho video một cái tên để nghe nó hay và có thể mọi người khi đọc thấy cái tên đó thì sẽ cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều vì đã theo dõi video của mình nhé. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong các video tiếp theo. Tạm biệt mọi người, chúc mọi người một buổi tối thật vui vẻ và hạnh phúc. Và đừng quên đón xem những video tiếp theo trên kênh của mình nha.